This show is brought to you by Sports Interaction. Want to bet? Then get in on the action at Sports Interaction. Whatever your sport, Sports Interaction has you covered. Bet pregame, in-game, or on one of our many unique prop bets. Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN, or in Ontario, download the app using the QR code at the bottom of the screen. 19 and over. Please play responsibly.
I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show. Powered by Sports Interaction. Wanna bet? What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
On today's episode of Leafs Corner, the Ryan O'Reilly trade.
Talking about trades, Julian. Trades.
Okay, we got it. Okay, before we get into the Ryan O'Reilly thing, we have to address the fact that, yes, we did record an episode that was supposed to be out today, and it was going to have all this information, and we were going to talk about Alan Walsh and Daryl Sutter, the Calgary Flames, and it was very good. It was very good.
Don't say past tense. We did actually talk about those things, but only producer Nick will ever hear it. It's part of our B-side collection, never to be released.
Can we mention the fact, too, I have to mention, I was off my phone yesterday, but I looked up in the chat and I saw that producer Nick scheduled the episode. Like, he sent the message saying he scheduled the episode. And then within like 10 minutes of that, you're like, oh, yep, Ryan O'Reilly got traded. Like, that's hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, only the Leafs would announce a trade at 11 p.m. on a Friday night, 2 weeks before the deadline.
Oh my God.
And I don't say that in the manner that they're doing it to inconvenience anyone, but I do think that they're highly sensitive to trying to have things leak, because I do think in this circumstance like this, a lot of teams would agree to that deal late Friday night in principle. They might even do the trade call, but mutually agree what time it would be announced on Saturday morning. But, you know, the Leafs like to, as soon as something's done, it's done, and they want to get it out there. They want to, for as best as they can, control the news flow. And so we got a 10:52 or whatever time it was p.m. Eastern time, email and tweet from the Leafs.
Ryan O'Reilly, Noel Acciari, Josh Pillar to Toronto. Mikhail Abramov, Adam Gaudette, a first-round pick from Toronto in 2023, a third-rounder from Ottawa in 2023, a 2024 second-round pick. All of those things going to St. Louis. And Minnesota gets a 2025 fourth-round pick. And they also retain part of Ryan O'Reilly's salary. That's the deal. That is the deal.
Right. And so, look, I'm having trouble in my network of people I communicate with around the league finding anyone who doesn't like this for Toronto. I'll read you right from my text without revealing who they are.
Ooh.
This on Ryan O'Reilly. He's having a down year, but I like it. Good chance there's still a lot left in the tank. Let me look further down. Exactly what they needed. Speaking of the Leafs, universally, I think a lot of people inside the game think this was a smart move for Kyle Dubas and the Leafs. I think externally, maybe there's some questions because this was the sort of trade Kyle Dubas said himself, right? He met the media, 10 days ago and was quite, reluctant himself to pay a first round pick plus for a rental player. And in this case, that's what he's done for two rental players. And, I should note right off the top, Ryan O'Reilly said to be very excited to be coming to play here close to his hometown, but I don't expect any contract extension talks in the near term. I think that he's going to get acclimated, get comfortable, and this can be a wait and see type of situation, which played out last year with Mark Giordano with the Leafs, a deadline day pickup who signed a 2-year extension after the season was done. I think that there's a possibility you're seeing O'Reilly stay in Toronto longer term because he likes it, the idea of it. But I don't think that it's going to be a Bo Horvat type of case where we're getting an extension announced within a couple of days. So this is got to be viewed at this point in time as a rental package. It's a lot. It's basically all of the Leafs remaining draft capital for the immediate term. I mean, of course, they could be trading 24 picks or more 25, 26 picks if they wanted. But, they don't have very much in the upcoming 2023 draft left to deal. They haven't wanted to touch their top prospect, Matthew Nyes, and I think a few other prospects. They managed to hold on to those guys, and they've used up a lot of their cap space. And so, there's all kinds of ways we can chop this up. But look at the Leafs forward group right now. Like, for me, this is the biggest deadline deal by a Leafs team, probably in 20 years.
Maybe. Yeah.
Like
I can't
since
think
the
of any other one.
days, the Pat Quinn era, they went and made big deals at the time for Ron Francis and Brian Leach. They brought Doug Gilmour back. Unfortunately, got injured, but Owen Nolan. They made some big swings in that era of the franchise. But since the salary cap's been around, I don't think you've seen as aggressive a move as this is, because I see it as potentially far more impactful than even if the Nick Foligno trade had worked out. And obviously it didn't because Foligno was injured. He played 8 or 9 games in Toronto. I don't think that the ceiling of Ryan O'Reilly is something entirely different with respect to Nick Foligno. And I don't think we should sleep on the Noel Acciari, aspect of this as well. And so right now you have 5 centermen in Toronto, Austin Matthews, John Tavares, Ryan O'Reilly, David Kampf, who's been here, and Noel Acciari. I believe they're all above 53% in the faceoff dot. The last 3 names I mentioned, they're all penalty killers. So they've added, O'Reilly and Acciari can chip in on the PK. Of course, O'Reilly is known as one of the better 200-foot players in the game. I know he's having a down season. I know he's coming off 6 weeks off a broken foot, but this is a difference-making kind of piece potentially. And I think what's most encouraging, honestly, Julian, is he came back to the Blues lineup. He played 3 games. And from what I was told from scouts in the building, that he was excellent in those games, that he looked like he had fully recovered. And so, man, it's a big swing. It's a moonshot. It's a Friday night trade few saw coming. I think, Ryan O'Reilly being linked to the Leafs isn't new. Even Noel Acciari to a lesser degree isn't new, but the way it came down sort of out of the clear blue sky, I'm halfway through a glass of red wine and bam, pretty big move. And now we get to see these guys play on Saturday night.
It's kind of funny because we mentioned on the podcast the possibility of a Ryan O'Reilly Leafs trade. I mean, that rumor was out there and we discussed it. My next question is just curious to know, even if it is kind of out the blue, do you have any insight on how long this might have taken to consummate between both sides?
It sounds like it really heated up in the last few days. The Leafs have had that interest. I think going back to December was when I first started, hearing that St. Louis might be in a position where they think about trading their captain, because that wasn't necessarily clear entering the season, right? I mean, now we have the Blues have traded Tarasenko and O'Reilly. They've added 2 first-round picks. So they now own 3 in the 2023 draft. They've got other players to sell. Ivan Barbashev's still there. They've started floating their defensemen. But, when the season started, I wouldn't have necessarily said that O'Reilly would be a guy moved at this deadline, but it hasn't been a good year in St. Louis, and Doug Armstrong drifted off the Band-Aid. And so I think the Leafs' interest does date back a couple months, but in the last few days, it really got cooking. And then, they needed Minnesota, as you mentioned, as in reading off the trade details, to get Ryan O'Reilly's cap hit to the lowest possible amount. And that's another part of this. The Leafs they basically used up all their remaining draft capital for 2023 and all their remaining cap space, more or less. They're pretty tight to the ceiling now. Especially once they get Matt Murray back off of LTIR when he's healthy here in the not too distant future, they're going to be right up against it. But I think that it's the Leafs clearly prioritized it, right? I mean, this is, they've been linked to Patrick Kane and Timo Meier. And I think that there was, at least some interest in both those cases surveying of the market, but they prioritized O'Reilly. They went out and made the move. I mean, look, there's some risk in this. There's a chance that this still becomes a buyer's market in the next 2 weeks. And this looks like too much to pay. That is possible. This might be a deadline where the teams that wait till the end to make their moves end up looking smartest because the prices really fall on some of the top remaining players. But, that being said, there's not enough. Like Ryan O'Reilly is a very specific piece and ad for the Leafs, right? I mean, you're talking like a 3rd-line center. As I mentioned, they now have 5 centers who are all extremely capable in the defensive aspects of the game and winning faceoffs. So one of those players, if everyone's healthy, is already pushed to the wing. Sheldon Keefe is a coach that loves to change his lines around in game. Like he does not, he doesn't write them in pen on the board, if you know what I mean. Like he's got the whiteboard there to erase and try new things. And I just think this gives him all kinds of pieces to shake things up if things aren't working. I would expect at some point we're going to see him try to build a 3rd line that's almost a shutdown line for the playoffs, a line that he's matching against Tampa's best players, especially when they're on the road. I would think O'Reilly's part of that, and maybe David Kampf is moved to the wing because he's filled that sort of role in the past. But he's got options now, and so I think this has tremendous potential for the Leafs lineup. But I just don't think there's anyone else out there. And it's still an if Ryan O'Reilly still has lots of gas in the tank, and if he comes back healthy from this injury, I don't think there's anyone else out there that could do what he does. I mean, we're talking a guy who's got Selke votes almost every year of his NHL career, and won a Selke trophy in 2019. He's been a finalist a couple other times. One of the best defensive forwards in the game. I think this changes the look of the Leafs in a meaningful way. And, that's why they paid a big price, and that's why they ultimately pulled the trigger.
So you mentioned the draft capital being used up, the salary cap space, what they have. So does this mean the Leafs are done ahead of the deadline? Like, can we expect them to kind of just sit with what they have? What's next for this team?
No, I'm told they're not done, that they're still actively in the marketplace for upgrades. I think what's notable now, though, is, as I understand it, the Leafs they may have a small amount of flexibility cap wise, but more or less they would be a cap in, cap out team if they were to make another upgrade. And so what you're talking about then is removing something from the roster or from the organization that isn't just a futures piece to bring in more salary. And so you're only making that trade if you think you're getting an upgrade, say on Justin Hall, and he's going out. If you're, say, acquiring a defenseman, getting an upgrade on an Alex Kerfoot or someone maybe that does some different things that you might need, and his salary is going out the door to make it work. Or maybe it's Camp, or maybe it's Pierre Engvall. I think the Leafs are going to look at and consider everything. You make this first trade with St. Louis. I mean, you're Kyle Dubas doesn't like the term all in, but he's kind of as all in as he's ever been, right? Since, this is his fifth year managing the team in the main chair. And so I think that he's still got 2 weeks to work the marketplace. And as I say, maybe if it develops into a buyer's market, he's able to dip back in and add another piece that isn't quite as expensive as it looks like it might be today. This takes the pressure off in a sense. I don't think they have to do something else. But they're definitely not, shutting the phones down and putting their feet up and enjoying their team. They're going to spend these next 13 days, I think, pretty aggressively looking for other ways to get better.
Kyle Dubas in the final year of his contract as GM. Austin Matthews will inevitably become the main topic point with his contract starting in the summer. This team has not gotten out of the first round since 2004. It does not get any more all in than that trade. It does not get any more all in than this trade deadline for the Toronto Maple Leafs. It is what it is.
I would also say there's not another team in the league that has as many expiring contracts and key contracts as they do coming up. I mean, what they've done is add 2 more UFAs. Like if you go to, Puckpedia or Cap Friendly, that it's just a list of guys who need new contracts one way or another for the Leafs. Michael Bunting, just go down the list. Justin Hall, Engvall, Kampf, Matthews, as you mentioned, is coming up 1 year out. Aston Reese. I mean, this is an all-in type of year, and there's tons of flexibility for them to pivot in a completely other direction, or maybe it's successful and they're just extending Matthews and Nylander. Maybe they're trying to get O'Reilly to sell him on a bit of a hometown discount, because it'd be hard to imagine him, making $7.5 million in Toronto as he has on the last number of years on his expiring deal. There's a lot of possibility, and then there's also the possibility that let's just call it as it is, that this doesn't work, that Kyle Dubas's bosses, Leafs ownership, Brendan Shanahan, decides that they're going another direction, and it's someone else making that decision with as clean of a cap page as you can pretty much have in today's game.
Yeah. Anything else you want to go in on the Leafs before we mention some of the other headlines with regards to Patrick Kane and Timo Meier and the Oilers and such? I want to make sure we exhaust every possible angle of this story.
Well, I'm just excited to see how it all fits together now. I mean, it's kind of cool. Like this team that at the time of the trade is 5th in the NHL in points percentage and pretty close to 4th is adding 2 pieces without subtracting, right? Anyone from the active roster. And so that's going to change because both those guys are playing every game when healthy. So you're knocking some players down a peg, and you're adding depth, but you're also adding a difference maker, I think, in O'Reilly. And, it's probably helpful too that he's played in other cities. You know what I mean? Like this isn't his first trade. I know he had a long run of success in St. Louis. He was the captain. He won the Conn Smythe. He won the Stanley Cup there. I mean, that'll be part of part of his life that he'll never forget. But here he is with a pretty unique opportunity to get thrown into this Leafs playoff chase, playoff race, potential Stanley Cup run. And they got to slay the dragon in round 1. So this is an intriguing move. I'd like to see if and how Tampa, might counter it in some ways.
That was my next thinking, man. Like at this point, if you're Tampa Bay and you see that, you're like, okay, all right, we have to respond to this because we all know they're playing in that first round. We all know what that matchup's going to be.
And we all know that Julian Breezeball is saying he can't do much and he doesn't have much cap room, which is true objectively, but this is one of the most creative GMs in the league is Julian Breezeball. One of certainly the most accomplished, I mean, with winning the cups, but also just some of he's got iron, what he's traded tons of first round picks in, it looks good when they win the cup, but if they didn't win the cup, some of those moves, would have been maybe harshly criticized. I have to believe that with the time remaining, not that he's reacting to Toronto's move. I think he would have been looking to upgrade his team anyway, because it's what he does, but I do think it puts a little onus on him to go out and do something for Tampa. Maybe it's the blue line for them, right? I mean, since last year, they've lost Ryan McDonough. He was a cap casualty in the offseason. They might not be as stout back there. I mean, still got a lot of horses, don't get me wrong, but I think that there's going to be a ball that falls in Tampa, because we already know this is a first round matchup. And we already know if you're both Tampa and the Leafs, you're planning on winning in the first round, but then you're probably facing Boston. So you're planning on two really, really difficult opponents. And that's before you even get to a conference final. Man,
this trade, like, I know everyone was kind of, poo-pooing the format and we're like, oh no, we already know what's going to happen with that Toronto. We're going to get that series. This trade excites me for that now. Like, I can't wait to hopefully the Calgary Flames make the playoffs so I can at least cover a playoff series, but I will definitely be tuning in for Toronto, Tampa Bay.
Well, and now all of a sudden, and I've said this, and I'm sure you've made the point, Julian, there's something matters in these last 25 games for the Leafs. It might not be the results explicitly, but it's how this fits together. It's finding basically you've got these new pieces, but how does that work? I mean, it's plausible. Look, they're going to play Saturday night against Montreal. They're going to start with a certain formation, but it's plausible it might not work initially, and they've got to juggle it around. Like, I think that if you're a Leafs fan, this gives you new reason to watch, because you're really trying to figure out what's the best version of this team, how good can they get before the ultimate test starting April 17th in Tampa. So I think this adds a little bit of life back into the season for Leafs fans, and I'm sure our good friend Steve, Adam, good friends, Jesse, producer Nick, sure they're all pretty fired up about this too.
All right. That concludes Leafs Corner. Until the very next time we discuss the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's time for Patrick Kane time. What can you tell us about that situation and whatever could be going on there?
Yeah, let's do a headlines segment. I'll be quick because I know we don't have a lot of time today, but Patrick Kane, huge point in his season and his decision making. Expected again, still within 3 to 4 days, I'd say that he's going to indicate to Chicago management what he'd like to do. We know the Leafs basically are off the board now. If they were ever going to be a serious option, I would say that door is most likely closed. As I've said, there's maybe some hope the Rangers could maybe think about it, but for all intents and purposes, let's call them closed. One new option I've heard about that's out there is that the Edmonton Oilers have expressed at least some small interest here to see if Patrick Kane would be willing to come and waive his no movement clause and go there.
No way. That would be insane.
And so let me be clear. I'm not saying that trade is going to happen because everyone wants to jump on these things, but I know for sure the Oilers have at least expressed some interest to see if there's something that can be done there. Ultimately, like with any team, Patrick Kane is going to be the call. Do you want to move is the first question, and will you move to our city is the second. I've heard, third, fourth party that Kane is at least maybe is piqued his interest, but I let's just see where that goes. But there's been at least some small interest there to see if there's a fit. I mean, look, we talked about Erik Karlsson with Edmonton last week. That seems to have gone a little quiet. The Oilers are clearly looking to see how they can make a big move, right? They're not just hunting around the fourth round pick for this rental player. I mean, in this case, Patrick Kane is a rental player, but they're looking to make impactful moves. And so stay tuned there.
Okay. You have piqued my curiosity with discussions about the Edmonton Oilers. Anything with Timo Meier? Actually,
another point on Edmonton.
Sorry.
Also is that, we've all been wondering what was going to happen, right? There's the waiver, like, is there going to be a big waiver move this week? They ultimately signed a couple players in the American Hockey League to manage in the short term their cap situation. I think a lot of people, including myself, just assumed Jesse Puljujarvi was the odd man out in Edmonton. I mean, it definitely looked and sounded that way, that he would definitely be traded 100%. They are a team that is going to have to create some room by moving a player out. But what's interesting to me is I've heard that in recent days, the Oilers have at least broached the possibility of extending Puljujarvi instead of just trading him, possibly trying to get him to be signed to a cheaper extension beyond this year. He's on an expiring deal. He's a restricted free agent. And, I don't think those talks went anywhere. I'm not sure where they stand at this moment, but, a guy that it just has always seemed like is on his last day in the city, they've at least broached the possibility of seeing if they could extend him. So, I mean, that's pretty interesting too. As we all look to see what moves the Oilers make to create cap space, because whatever they do, if it's a big name or a small name, it's basically money in, money out. And so whether it's someone like Warren Fogle, or maybe still it's Puljujarvi that's the odd man out, maybe it's somebody else they're trading. They have to remove money from that roster, but they're at least seeing if Puljujarvi is willing to stick around. And I don't know if he is at this point, but I just thought it's interesting they've had that discussion.
I just had a weird deja vu moment because that's exactly what you said during the episode that no one will ever hear.
Well,
the Puljujarvi detail.
I mean, but you have to remember, no one's ever heard it but you and Nick and me.
So I know. That's why
still
I'm saying
new information that the
very
listeners haven't heard yet.
Very new. It's just, just a shout out to the episode no one will ever hear. Okay, sorry
Timo
about
Meier,
that.
Number one.
Let's go to Timo.
Trade deadline big board.
Let's do
number
it.
One with a bullet. It actually sounds like things have gone quiet here. And so here's what I said on the episode you didn't hear. Sounds like Timo Meier is holding up the market, and I would expect he's the next forward traded, something to that effect. Well, that analysis was not correct because Ryan O'Reilly was, in fact, the next forward traded, along with another forward named Noah Chari. But, it does sound as though things have gone a little quiet on Meier. I wouldn't read too much into that. I mean, obviously, the Leafs now are no longer a bidder there. I still believe New Jersey and Carolina to be the teams with the highest degree of interest and the biggest ability to make this addition. And I think, ultimately the Devils and Hurricanes now know without a doubt that, it's three pieces for Timo Meier. That's what the Sharks ask is, they want a first round pick. They want a young player. They want a nice prospect. That's where some of the haggling comes in, I'm sure, with the list that each team has of prospects. And, now we see what happens, but it doesn't sound as though that, things have cooled off there for the moment. Now, typical caveats. You might be listening to this on Sunday and maybe one phone call's changed things. Maybe New Jersey's come back and said, okay, you can have prospect X, and that moves things forward. But, for the time being, as of Saturday afternoon, that has gone quiet, but I expect it will heat up at some point because Timo Meier only gets more valuable when you take away Horvat, you take away Tarasenko, you take away, Ryan O'Reilly. There's the impactful forwards, and there was a lot of them to enter this trade period. We're losing them one by one, but Meier still is just dangling there for someone.
Okay. We've talked a lot about teams who could be buying at the deadline. What about teams who could be selling at the deadline?
Two stand out to me. The most interesting, arguably, is the Washington Capitals. Now, on Saturday, they're going to play a Stadium Series game outdoors in Raleigh, North Carolina. I don't know that they've fully committed to their plan just yet, but there are indications that the Capitals are now looking potentially at selling some of their players. And what's interesting there is they have a couple defensemen that are pending unrestricted free agents. And one, that's played a huge role in that organization, Dmitry Orlov. The Capitals have had some contract extension talks with him. It sounds like term has been a real sticking point in terms of trying to get him signed. And there is some belief that the Capitals would entertain offers for Orlov. They also have Nick Jensen, a player that's been part of their organization the last number of seasons. And as you go further down the lineup, TVR, not JVR, his brother, who is also involved out of Philly in trade talks, but Trevor Van Riemsdyk, another defenseman with a pretty low ticket in terms of his cap hit. Those are players on expiring deals that I think could be on the market, especially, Washington's had such a tough run of injuries and other issues come up. I think they lead the league in man games lost. it seems as though they're starting to lean fairly heavily towards punting on this season, selling the assets they have to sell, and then rebooting it again next year. The other team, as discussed a little bit, but the Nashville Predators, I believe, could come out of this weekend ready to basically entertain any and all offers on any of their players. So that brings players like Matthias Ekholm into play. I wonder about Jeannot there. He's a pending restricted free agent, hits like a truck, can play, I think, an important bottom six role. I wonder if they make him available. Certainly, I think there'd be heavy interest, but the Predators are a team to really watch, especially if their games this weekend, which haven't been played at the time of this recording, don't go their way. I think that David Poile is ready to shake things up in Nashville.
Take a breath. That's a lot of info you just went through in a matter of 30 minutes?
Yeah, that's enough though, because we're gonna be back on Monday, man. Things are heating up. I'm loving this.
I'm loving this too, man. We will be back on Monday. Get your questions in for Ask CJ, whether on Discord, whether on Twitter. Subscribe to the podcast however you listen to the podcast, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, however you do it, because there will be more madness to come as we make the run to the March 3rd trade deadline. CJ, I hope you've mixed in a water or two.
Yeah, I'm literally still in my running gear. There's no time to do anything.
You came from a run.
Okay, I'm literally wearing my smelly running gear. That's my dedication to the fans.
Go take a shower, buddy.
I'm worried though. If I take a shower, I might miss something.
I think you can leave your phone for another 15 minutes.
Okay, deal.
All right. For CJ, I'm Julian. So long. Enjoy your weekend. Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction. Want to bet?
Inside the Game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JKMcKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.